The two-party system in American history. Understand the origins of political parties in the U.S. It's our purpose to identify and describe the three major periods of single-party domination and describe the current era of divided government. The origins and history of political parties in the U.S. help explain how the two major parties work today and how they affect American government. Presented are four terms we should keep in mind as we go through the video: incumbent, current office holder, faction, conflicting group, electorate, people eligible to vote, sectionalism, narrow-minded concern for or devotion to the interests of one section of a country. The beginnings of the American two-party system can be traced to the battle over ratification of the Constitution. The conflicts of the time, centering on the proper form and role of government in the United States, were not styled by the adoption of the Constitution. Rather, those conflicts were carried over into early years of the Republic. They led directly to the formation of the nation's first full-blown political parties. It should be noted at this point that George Washington was opposed to political parties. As president, he named arch foes, Hamilton and Jefferson, to his new cabinet to get them to work together, in an unsuccessful attempt to avoid the creation of formally organized and opposing groups. The Federalist Party was the first to appear. It formed around Alexander Hamilton, who served as Secretary of the Treasury in the new government organized by George Washington. The Federalists were, by and large, the party of the rich and well-born. Most of them had supported the Constitution. Led by Hamilton, the Federalists worked to create a stronger national government. They favored vigorous executive leadership and a set of policies designed to correct the nation's economic ills. The Federalists' program appealed to financial, manufacturing, and commercial interests. To reach their goals, they urged a liberal interpretation of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, the nation's first Secretary of State, led the opposition to the Federalists. Jefferson and his followers were more sympathetic to the common man than were the Federalists. They favored a very limited role of the new government created by the Constitution. In their view, Congress should dominate that new government, and its policy should help the nation's small shopkeepers, laborers, farmers, and planters. The Jeffersonians insisted on a strict construction of the provisions of the Constitution. Jefferson resigned from Washington's cabinet in 1793 to concentrate on organizing his party. Originally, the new party took the name Anti-Federalist. Later it became known as the Jeffersonian Republicans or the Democrat Republicans. Finally, by 1828, it became the Democratic Party. These two parties first clashed in the election of 1796. John Adams, the Federalist candidate to succeed Washington as president, defeated Jefferson by just 3 votes in the Electoral College. Over the next 4 years, Jefferson and James Madison worked tirelessly to build the Democratic Republican Party. Their efforts paid off in the election of 1800. Jefferson defeated the incumbent or current office holder, President Adams. Jefferson's party also won control of Congress. The Federalists never returned to power. The history of the American party system since 1800 can be divided into 4 major periods. Through the first 3 of these periods, one or the other of the 2 major parties was dominant, regularly holding the presidency and usually both houses of Congress. The nation is now in the fourth period, much of it marked by divided government. In the first of these periods, from 1800 to 1860, the Democrats won 13 of 15 presidential elections. They lost office only in the elections of 1840 and 1848. In the second era, from 1860 to 1932, the Republicans won 14 of 18 elections, losing only in 1884, 1892, 1912, and 1916. The third period, from 1932 to 1968, began with Democratic return to power and Franklin Roosevelt's first election to the presidency. The Democrats won 7 of 9 presidential elections, losing only in 1952 and 1956. Through the fourth and current period, which began in 1968, the Republicans have won 6 of 10 presidential elections, and the White House is now held by Barack Obama. The Democrats have controlled both houses of Congress much of the current period, although they only hold the Senate at this time. The era of the Democrats from 1800 to 1860. Thomas Jefferson's election in 1800 marked the beginning of a period of Democratic domination that was to last until the Civil War. The Federalists, soundly defeated in 1800, had disappeared altogether by 1816. For a time, through the era of good feeling, the Democratic Republicans were unopposed in national politics. However, by the mid-1820s, they had split into factions or conflicting groups. By the time of Andrew Jackson's administration in 1829 to 1837, a potent National Republican Party, also called the Whigs, had arisen to challenge the Democrats. The major issues of the day: conflicts over public lands, the Second Bank of the United States, high tariffs, and slavery, all had made new party alignments inevitable. The Democrats, led by Jackson, were a coalition of small farmers, debtors, frontier pioneers, and slaveholders. They drew much of their support from the South and the West. The years of Jacksonian democracy produced 3 fundamental changes in the nation's political landscape. 1. Voting rights for all white males. 2. Huge increase in the number of elected offices around the country. And 3. The spread of the spoils system. This is the practice of awarding public offices, contracts, and other government favors to those who supported the party in power. The Whig Party was led by the widely popular Henry Clay and the great orator Daniel Webster. The party consisted of a loose coalition of Eastern bankers, merchants, and industrialists, and also many owners of large Southern plantations. The Whigs were opposed to the tenets of Jacksonian democracy and strongly supported a high tariff. However, the Whigs' victories were few. Although they were the other major party from the mid-1830s to the 1850s, the Whigs were able to elect only 2 presidents, both of them being war heroes. The 2 heroes were William Henry Harrison in 1840 and Zachary Taylor in 1848. By the 1850s, the growing crisis over slavery split both major parties. Left leaderless by the deaths of Clay and Webster, the Whigs fell apart. Meanwhile, the Democrats split into two sharply divided camps, the North and the South. During this decade, the nation drifted towards the Civil War. Of the several groupings that arose to compete for supporters among the former Whigs and fragmented Democrats, the Republican Party was the most successful. Founded in 1854, it drew many Whigs and anti-slavery Democrats. The Republicans nominated their first presidential candidate, John C. Fremont, in 1856. They elected their first president, Abraham Lincoln, in 1860. With Lincoln's election, the Republican Party became the only party in the history of American politics to make the jump from third party to major party status. As you will see, even greater things were in store for the Republicans. The next era is the era of the Republicans, 1860 to 1932. The Civil War signaled the beginning of the second era of one-party domination. For nearly 75 years, the Republicans dominated the national scene. They were supported by business and financial interests and by farmers, laborers, and newly freed African Americans. The Democrats, crippled by the war, were able to survive mainly through their hold on the solid South after the era of Reconstruction came to a close in the mid-1870s. For the balance of the century, they slowly rebuilt their electoral base. In all that time, they were able to place only one candidate in the White House, Grover Cleveland, in 1884 and again in 1892. Those elections marked only short breaks in the Republican supremacy. Riding the crest of popular acceptance and unprecedented prosperity, the GOP remained the dominant party well into the 20th century. The election in 1896 was especially critical in the development of the two-party system. It climaxed years of protest by small business owners, farmers, and emerging labor unions against big business, financial monopolies, and the railroads. The Republican Party nominated William McKinley and supported the gold standard. The Democratic candidate was William Jennings Bryan, a supporter of free silver, was also endorsed by the Populist Party. With the McKinley victory in 1896, the Republicans regained the presidency. In doing so, they drew a response from a broader range of the electorate, the people eligible to vote. This new strength allowed the Republicans to maintain their role as the dominant party in national politics for another 3 decades. The Democratic Party lost the election in 1896, but it won it on another score. Bryan, its young, dynamic presidential nominee, campaigned throughout the country as a champion of the little man. He helped to push the nation's party politics back towards the economic arena and away from the division of sectionalism that had plagued the nation for so many years. Again, sectionalism emphasizes a devotion to the interest of a particular region. The Republicans suffered their worst setback in the era of 1912 when they renominated incumbent President William Howard Taft. Former President Theodore Roosevelt denied the nomination of his party, subsequently left the Republicans to become the candidate of his Bull Moose Progressive Party. Traditional Republican support was divided between Taft and Roosevelt. As a result, the Democratic nominee, Woodrow Wilson, was able to capture the presidency. 4 years later, Wilson was reelected by a narrow margin. Again, however, the Democratic successes of 1912 and 1916 provided only a brief interlude. The GOP reasserted its control of the nation's politics by winning each of the next 3 presidential elections. Warren Harding won in 1920, Calvin Coolidge in 1924, and Herbert Hoover in 1928.